evening, Lake Orion. Welcome to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. Just thought I'd say hello. How you doing? I wanted to share today about, it's been a while since we've done some History Now, so let's get started. I want to talk about something that is of extreme one of the darkest moments ever to occur in world history during World War II, which was the Nazi euthanasia program, better known as T4. It was the genocide program in Nazi Germany against those who had mental and physical disabilities. This lasted from September of 1939 to technically August 1941, though killings would continue until the end of the war. Approximately 70,273 people were sadly killed in Germany and in Austria, but particularly during Germany during World War II. There have been other estimates of 93,251 were killed at the end of 1941, and approximately 200,000 young men and women with children and adults with physical and mental disabilities died as a result of the T4 program. And this would be the prelude to what would become of the Nazi Holocaust, which historians know that's one of the darkest times in world history, which was the Holocaust. As early as 1933, Hitler had a very Darwinistic view. He believed, as did many members of the Nazi Party, wanted to kill off as many mentally ill and physically ill people as possible. But at the same time, Hitler knew that the public would not accept the killing of the, quote, innocent and of the not, and especially in Catholic areas. In Germany, if you watched my History Now on the history of Germany, I've talked about there are a few areas. Germany is mostly Protestant, but there are Catholic areas in Germany, particularly in Bavaria and also Westphalia, but mostly in Bavaria. Darwin had a thinking of only the strong shall survive. There was no room for the weak. Hitler was also also believed in the Aryan race. Only the pure, strong German. Hitler and the Nazi Party mostly hated any birth defects. They wanted to have the, quote, perfect German. But Hitler had those feelings as early as 1933 when he was Chancellor of Germany. So Hitler appointed Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician, but also SS Oberfuhrer Victor Barak, who were both seen as the masterminds of the T4 program. They organized everything. They came up with the planning. They set up the mental psychiatric homes in Germany. And it was also, they decided that the head of the T4 program would be a guy named Philip Buehler, who ended up becoming the head of the T4 program. Also, prior to 1940, the killings were mostly done by lethal injection. They were not done. In 1940, as we will get to, the idea was done by gassing, mostly by carbon monoxide poisoning. In 1939, there were 6 extermination psychiatric hospitals, extermination centers, 6 psychiatric hospitals. The Interior Ministry required doctors to report, or the Interior Ministry required doctors and also parents and wives to report children with severe disabilities. What I mean by that is anyone with a mental disability, physical disability, Down syndrome, they were to report that to the Interior Ministry. As I said, it was harder in Catholic areas, so the Nazi Party naturally lied. They told parents that their kids would be given improved treatments of medicine. But when the Nazis killed off the young man or young woman, they would often use the excuse that the participant died of pneumonia, which was not the case at all. And to further give proof, brain samples were often taken and given to parents to assure that their son or daughter had not died in vain. As I made mention, there were 6 psychiatric hospitals. I actually do have estimates of how many young men or women with disabilities died and what years the camps were put in use. The first camp occurred in Bernburg, which was set from November of 1940 to July of 1943. Approximately 8,601 men and women passed away as a result at that camp. At Brandenburg, another one was occurred at Brandenburg. This was open from February to October of 1940. 9,772 perished at Brandenburg. Grafeneck was another one. From January to December of 1940, 9,839 perished at Grafeneck. Hadamar, this was from January of 1941 to July of 1942. 10,072 lives were lost at Hadamar. At Harzheim, this was the longest running psychiatric center camp. 18,269 perished, and that camp lasted from May 1940 to December of 1944. And the last camp was Sonnenstein, where 13,720 perished from January of 1941 to July of 1942. In 1939, the Nazis decided not just children were to be their victims. It also included adults with mental illnesses or physical disabilities. Hospital records were often produced. The hospital records would be used to determine which adults had mental illnesses or physical disabilities. And also there was a committee that was set up of doctors, about 5 doctors approximately, 3 had to approve. When we come back to History Now, we're going to talk about the gassing. We'll go more into detail about the committee and actions of what the Nazis did here on History Now on ONTV.
Set the date. Lake Orion is having its 16th annual Flower and Art Fair on Friday, May 6th and Saturday, May 7th. This event takes place in the streets of downtown Lake Orion and kicks off the summer season. It's a wonderful place to purchase garden-related products and handmade craft items. This also provides a great opportunity to buy that special Mother's Day gift. Want to be a vendor in the fair or know someone who does? Don't delay, apply today. Give us a call or check out our website for an application. For more information or to download a vendor application, visit our website at downtownlakeorion.org. We hope to see you there.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. What we were left talking about was we were talking about the Nazi T4 program, which lasted from 1939 to 1941, even though it would continue after 1941, but wanted to continue. We left off talking about how the Nazis determined how hospital records concluded or played a role in adults with mental illnesses or physical disabilities. I want to talk about back in 1939, as if Germany invaded Poland. And one thing that the Nazis did was they would execute Poles, many of whom had mental and physical disabilities. They were quite often not shot by the Nazi soldiers, also by members of the SS. But Hitler did not want the SS to handle those with mental and physical disabilities, for whom he saw that as the work of his doctor's personal physician Karl Brandt, Victor Barak, and Philip Buehler. But the SS did have a role in the T4 program. Victor Barak actually was the SS Oberfuhrer, or the plenipotentiary of the representing the SS's role in the T4 program. Himmler actually witnessed one of the gassing events that would occur in Brandenburg in 1940. Now, I talked about briefly that the Nazis would result to using gassing, would gas their victims in these psychiatric hospitals and in these doctor centers and mental institutions. And they were, as I mentioned before we went to break, there was a committee of doctors, 3 of whom, out of 5, 3 had to approve of whether or not they were worthy of life or not worthy of life. When I talk about, there were some who had disabilities that were willing to work, that could work. Those who could work were given there was a plus, there was a minus, and there was a question mark. With the plus, it meant that the doctors approved of the execution, and there was no way out of getting out of it. The negative was that this person could work, this person would be able to be of some use, but there was that possibility that that young man or woman would be executed later. And the question mark was they didn't know what to do. So it was like kind of a reprieve until a conclusion was made. Later on, as we would get into the war, several Nazis went on their old regard and chose to ignore the decision making and just went ahead and executed young men and women with disabilities. Their mindset, as I said, was only the strong shall survive. There was no room for the weak. There was bedding in beds that could be used for their soldiers. They felt that it was a waste of time to support and benefit those young men and women with disabilities, and the Nazis sought to exterminate those young men and women with disabilities. as I made mention, the Nazis still used the same excuses to encourage parents and encourage those who've had disabilities to go to these psychiatric hospitals for treatment. And a lot of times parents had no idea what they were putting their children or their young man or woman who they were supporting, where they had no idea that they were essentially sending them to death. One instance I wanted to talk about in terms of the children was in 1939. There was a mercy killing that took place. One of Hitler's closest confidants ended up having a child with severe disability, and that person asked Hitler what he should do with him. Hitler said he would have his personal physician Karl Brandt look at him, and as a result, Karl Brandt ended up killing the young man, and it kind of paved the way for future T4 programs to take place. As I made mention, there was a committee 3 had to approve. Now, this continued in 1940. But at that point, the public started getting suspicious about what was going on with the T4 program. They would walk around these psychiatric hospitals, and they would see ash coming out, and they would see these crematorium centers behind these psychiatric hospitals. The German public started getting suspicious, and it led to quite a bit of protests that would occur. But at the same time, the Nazi Party kept continuing the executions. And one thing I forgot to make mention of was, as it continued in 1940, Brandenburg and Grafeneck, which they both were ended in 1940, so the killings continued. 10,000 young men and women with disabilities were killed at Brandenburg, Grafeneck, and also at Harzheim in 1940. Sonstein had 6,000, and all that together led to approximately 36,000 deaths that occurred in 1940. In 1941, another 35,000 were killed before Hitler ended the program. But even after that, the centers also paid attention to the concentration camp inmates. So it was not just young men and women with disabilities. So the majority ended up dead were young men and women with disabilities. When we come back to History Now, I want to talk about the takedown of the T4 program, the church protests, and then the doctor's trial here on History Now on ONTV. Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. And we're getting back to talking about one of the darkest moments in history, the Nazi T4 program. The downfall of the T4 program was coming. In 1940, 1941, there was church protests led by Bishop August Graf von Galen, who was a Catholic bishop. He spoke out against Hitler and the Nazi Party for the executions of young men and women with disabilities. I made mention in the second segment, the German public was starting to become very suspicious of the of the Nazis' intentions, of what they were doing. Parents stopped sending in their children, realizing they were sending them to die. Parents also supports coordinators also stopped sending in their supportees. Also, there was protests that were occurring, especially in the Catholic areas, particularly in Bavaria, but also in Westphalia. Hitler spoke in a speech in Hof, Germany, where it was rarely this was the only time Hitler got booed during a speech. And Hitler very much cared about public opinion, his image. Hitler wanted to exterminate young men and women with disabilities, he absolutely didn't want his name involved. He did not want to be personally, quote, involved. And this was done because of public opinion. So he had people were pleading to Hitler to stop this. The assumption was Hitler didn't know that this was going on, that this was done behind Hitler's back. That was not the case at all. But Hitler very much wanted to protect his image, and he knew that public opinion would not be very high on him if he decided to continue the program. So on August 24th, 1941, Hitler ended up canceling the T4 program. But at this point, the damage was already done. There was 35,000 killed in 1941. Another 36,000 was killed in 1940. And as I made mention, even after the T4 program ended, the killings continued in the psychiatric centers. And particularly there was 4 extermination camps or 4 extermination psychiatric wards that were open. The deaths continued until the end of the war. In 1946, there at Nuremberg was the doctor's trial, which the Americans, the British, and the Soviet Union accused 23 Nazi doctors and administrators of crimes against humanity. 16 of those 23 were guilty of crimes against humanity, 7 of which were put to death. The other 9 that were convicted were subjected to lengthy prison sentences. 7 of those, that I may mention, were put to death by hanging, but it also included Brandt, who was Hitler's physical physician, and Brock, both of whom were the organizers of the Nazi T4. In 2014, the German government dedicated a national memorial to those who were killed, who had with disabilities were killed. They placed it next to the Tiergarten Park, which it was next to the building where several revolted against the Nazi regime. It was dedicated in Berlin. The memory of, and the question I often get asked was, did the Nazis execute those with Asperger's syndrome? As I made mention in the Asperger's syndrome presentation, Hitler, it was extremely close. Dr. Hans Asperger actually did protect young men and women with intellectual disabilities. Even though Hans Asperger was probably perceived as a Nazi himself, this was the perception, but he did make moves to protect those with Asperger's syndrome based on their intellect and how intelligent. It is a very good question of what Hitler did and what the Nazi Party did to those who had intellectual disabilities, particularly Asperger's syndrome, because those with Asperger's syndrome could work. Those with Asperger's syndrome are very intelligent, very creative-minded, and also it was very hard to tell if it's also very hard to tell if somebody with Asperger's syndrome has a disability at all because of the appearance of a young man or woman with Asperger's syndrome. It was very hard to tell whether he or she had a disability, has a disability. Just like today, I get the perception of, oh, you don't have Asperger's syndrome, but I really do. So, but it would have been very, very hard during the 1930s, 1940s to determine what Hitler and the Nazi Party would have done to anybody who has Asperger's syndrome. But it is a question that I get asked quite a bit, especially with having Asperger's syndrome and my fascinations and my obsessions in studying World War II. But it's quite a good question to ask. The legacy of the T4 program was Hitler did not just focus on the Jews. Hitler focused on those who had disabilities. Hitler focused on other groups, such as homosexuals, gypsies, particularly in terms of those with disabilities. It really puts into hindsight what Hitler really was, how Hitler focused into really that Darwinistic theory of only the strong shall survive. There was no room for the weak. And it's unfortunate because there are those with disabilities who get targeted because of that viewpoint, of that Darwinistic viewpoint of only the strong shall survive. And it happens in countries throughout the world. But it really went to a new level when, back during World War II, when Hitler and the Nazis ordered the T4 program against those with disabilities. Well, that will conclude this week's episode of History Now. Come back soon. Have a great night, Lake Orion, and see you soon.